Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Shares with me, Kevin Britz, leading the charge with insights, information, and ultimately effective results. Today's guest believes that when we live, connect, and communicate authentically, we send out ripples, which make the world a more caring and connected place, one ripple at a time. He's joining me in our leadership and coaching segment all the way from Bali, Indonesia. So really cool to have you here, Dr. Jonathan Marion. How are you doing, Dr. Jonathan?
Very good, thank you. And Jonathan is fine. Thank you so much for having me on, Kevin.
Cool, yeah. Thank you for joining us. And I very often, share information out there and kind of go, bring me some interesting guests, bring me some interesting insights. But before we just, jump into questions and unpacking information, don't you want to just give us a bit of insights of who you are, where you're from, and a bit of background about you?
Sure, be happy to. So as for this segment, I'm here sort of in the capacity of I now work primarily as a transformational life coach, consultant, and speaker. But that was based on a previous career. I had been a cultural anthropology professor for 20 years. And at a certain point, as much as I loved the discipline, found that academia just really wasn't the right way for me to show up authentically, as you just read from that sort of idea about authentic ripples of how we live and connect. And when I looked at, what was really right for me, it wasn't being attached to a world where things were based on external measures of success. And in academia, latest article, latest grant, latest teaching evaluation. And when I thought about what part of that was most meaningful to me, it was working with students, but not just in the formal classroom setting, but especially with graduate students, like helping them figure out what were their own questions and how are they going to find their own answers, and helping you figure out your questions and how you're going to find your own answers. That's life coaching. And that's what sort of took me in this direction.
Yeah, because anthropology is one thing, but it's skewed, moving straight into life coaching. That's quite of a turn. And it's sort of, did you go through a coaching process? Did you kind of, come across this because it's something that you felt, you would love to do? And so how did you get to where you are today?
Absolutely. I was actually on a research trip in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, in first half of 2019. And I was staying with a friend of mine who lives there, and sort of came to the realization that I'm staying in a bedroom that's smaller than my closet at home, but I feel more at home here. And what was that about? And it was recognizing that it had to do with quality of relationships, and that the people who I was friends with in Brazil, they knew what I did professionally, but that's not why they cared about me. They might have been proud of me or proud for me, but they loved Jonathan the person, not all of those external accolades. And that's what made me go, okay, so academia is not for me. And again, it was thinking through what part of my academic career I enjoyed the most. And, again, it was helping people, undergraduates, like in the 5 or 10 minute informal conversations before or after class, or my master's or PhD students, figure out what questions did they have and how are they going to find their own answers. And again, helping you figure out your own questions, helping you figure out your own answers, that's coaching. And so then that got me interested. I researched several programs, went through a program, got accredited by the International Coach Federation, and that's sort of the process that unfolded.
Fantastic, amazing. So, I started the introduction on who you are, and some of the beliefs that you hold is live, connect, and communicate authentically to create those ripples. Tell us about that and why that analogy, and how have you seen that sort of impacting what it is you do today?
Sure. So I think this is such an important concept. And when I've thought about my own life and the people who've had the biggest impact on me, there may be specific lessons, there may be specific, ideas or frameworks, but more than anything else, it's how they show up. How do they show up in the world? How do they interact with people around them? How do I feel about how they've interacted with me? And that's what really got me thinking about, what was it that those people had in common? And it was a certain type of authenticity, like they were being themselves. They weren't trying to be anyone else. They weren't trying to frame things, in a way that was just catchy for the sake of being catchy. And it was really something that they believed, they felt in, and just how they showed up in the world, how they interacted is what I really learned the most from, as far as how I wanted to be and things that maybe I wanted to take into my life or let go of. And so then when I built my own model of coaching and consulting, that was really at the heart of it.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, because I mean, as you think of ripples, like ripples, impact ripples. And essentially it's, what are, you could almost coin it as like, what are the type of ripples that you're creating in the world, and how is that impacting upon impacting? And it's the reason why I still do the lunchtime series, because, at the core fundamental reason and purpose that the lunchtime series exists is you never know how much impact it's going to have on people's lives. And I've had so many scenarios and conversations where people use the lunchtime series as a reference point of conversations around interesting coaches and specialists and people on the show, and how that impacts people's lives. Something that you share with us around some of your interview questions is around the how and the being, right? And the question is, how can reorienting and focusing on the how and being unlock a greater alignment with ease, connection, and fulfillment? And don't you just want to just unpack the being part a little bit? I mean, I know what you mean, but a lot of people, I often find, especially in a corporate setting or a corporate environment, you speak about the being of something and what that process looks like. And most people are quite detached and unaware of what being something and being in the moment is. So can you speak about the how and the being, and what does that mean, and what is it that you want people to know about that?
Sure. So I think the first thing that's so important there is, and this isn't unique to me, like I've heard multiple people say it, but we're human beings, we're not human doings. And so the minute that we start to focus just on on what we're doing, then we're actually moving away from who we are as human beings. And that's where I think the how piece comes in, because I can't always control what happens in the world. Most of the time I can't. Like there's forces much bigger than me. And, a lot of times you've heard, the sort of throwaway adage of, life is what you make it. And that's just not true. What I think is much closer to true is it's 10% how you make it, 90% how you take it. Because how I show up, how I respond, that's the part I do have some control over. That's the part that really is, how is it that I, in my case, Jonathan, want to show up, whether it's in this interaction, in this interview, working on this project, onboarding someone new. How? It could be a personal relationship, with my family, with a partner. How do I want to interact? I can't always, other people are involved. We can't coach people who aren't in the room. We can't change people's minds, but how we show up, we always have control over. So that's where I think the value really comes. And then as far as being more broadly, it really was so powerful to me when I started to think about it that I actually used being as the acronym for my approach to coaching and consulting. And so the B is for begin where you are, because I think all too often when we know we want something to shift in life or change, we just rush to change things without actually taking stock of where we are. What are the skill sets? Yes, what are the, obstacles in the moment, but what are the resources? What are the lessons? What, do we have as far as strengths to bring to it? And I think if you think about navigating, right? So whether it's the GPS on your phone, in your car, old-fashioned map, no matter how good any of those are, if there isn't a signal that can say where you are right now, they're useless. So I think begin where you are is really crucial. The next step of that The E is for explore where you're going. And again, I think when we want to make a change, all too often we just go anywhere because it's not where we are. And, think about someone going on vacation. Great, go on vacation. But do you like mountains? Do you like beaches? Do you want cultural events? So just really explore what are the options and, pay attention to what's really resonating in your system. And once you know where you're starting and where you're going, the I is for identify your options, because there's always multiple ways between two locations. So if it's a matter of you want the most direct route, you want the most scenic route, you want to be able to stop and account for certain things along the way, wrap up certain things that you feel were commitments, check in with certain people who it's important to you to not move on without doing that. So B was begin where you are, E was explore where you're going, I is for identify your options. And I think the other important part of I that sometimes gets overlooked is take stock of, in your life, how have you made the decisions that have been the most fulfilling for you? And what process did you use? Was it a pro and cons list? Was it, just trusting your gut? Was it taking it to people who know you well and checking what they felt? So how have you made the decisions that have worked out the best and you feel in retrospect really were, the right ones for you? And how have you maybe made decisions that didn't work out? So identify how you've made your own best decisions. Now apply that to the options you've identified for moving between where you are and where you want to go. Brings us to N, now start. I'm sure you've seen it as much as I have. All too often, we're so worried about getting it just right and accounting for every possibility that we don't actually move. We don't actually start to change anything. Perfectionism is an extreme version of this. It's that, paralysis by analysis type thing. And I think the important thing to understand here is just because you've identified your route, it doesn't mean there won't be detours. There are detours in life all the time, but you're not lost, because if you've identified how you're getting between two places and you know why, so I'm driving home from work, the road's closed, okay, I go around. Or there's a different type of detour. I'm going home, I'm tired, I don't really feel like running a different errand, but I realize if I stop to pick up the dry cleaning, it's only going to be an extra 15 minutes, whereas if I have to make another trip tomorrow, it's an hour. So I choose to make a detour, but I'm not lost. But I don't get to do any of it if I don't start. And just to wrap it up, the G is get your best life, not in the sense of, you're done, it's complete, but have a chance, take the time, really recognize what's the ground you've covered there. What are the things you've identified? What are the new, whether it's skill sets or relationships or opportunities that you've built? So you could also look at G almost as gratitude and sort of recognize, the growth and the progress you've made, and that you now have this cycle, this process under your belt and can repeat it at any time. So that's my being strategy for sort of getting the most meaning and fulfillment out of whatever you're doing.
I love that, because I always I do a lot of facilitation and a lot of workshops where when we share information, the very starting point that I start with is the brain loves structure and strategy. And that's a beautiful structure of information and a strategy on how to just, what the being part of life should look like. And I really love that. But one of the things that that we have on the questions that you shared with us, right, is around stress, anxiety, isolation, and suffering. And if we look at the beingness of our lives and the stress, anxiety, isolation, and suffering, a large part of that, and in my opinion, but there are some studies to show that our devices and our the Internet of Things are really actively involved at isolating us from people, right? So, some of the research I've done is what we know is the future of work skill is self-management and social intelligence, right? Those are skills that we cannot be, the future of work and the future of humanity cannot be without. But yet our this AI factor, the Internet of Things, is really playing into that, right? How can we start socially? How does the social focus and pressure related to doing and achieving cause so much stress, anxiety, isolation, and suffering? Because I think these things that we use every day, like our phones, our connections, our laptops, the Internet of Things, there's an element of connection there, but to a large degree, it's debilitating social connection, and it's also it's almost the foundation of a lot of stress and anxiety and depression and these symptomatic areas showing up in such big ways. So how do we change that narrative?
Yeah, so I think you touched on something really crucial there, which is it may be providing informational connection, but it's actually social isolation. Yeah. And if you understand us at a biocultural level as human beings, then the idea of co-regulation between nervous systems and how we even learn to regulate our nervous system is an interaction with others. And if we then look at what is stress and how does it show up in the body, well, we have one autonomic nervous system, and it was evolved for stressful events. But stressful events meaning life-threatening. So, giant bear and, fight, flight, freeze. So either I bonk it in the head with a rock hard enough that I get away, I run fast enough, or I manage to stay very still and it loses interest. And that's super stressful. But once that situation is resolved, all of that stuff drains out of my body, and I don't have life-threatening triggers for stress on a very frequent basis at all. And in cultural anthropology, it's one of the things we refer to as the mismatch theory, because there's a mismatch between the speed of cultural evolution, which involves all of this, Internet of Things and, technology and information, versus the speed of evolution biologically. So we have not developed another nervous system to deal with, got an email that's stressful, got stuck in traffic, saw that someone else seems to be getting a better opportunity, see that this person has this object and it seems to make them happy and I don't have it. And so what we're getting our bodies flooded with are the stress hormones that are meant for real life and death. That's how they evolved biologically. And yet, when do those ever dissipate? When do those stresses go away? When we keep having exposure to them over and over in such an unending cycle. So
yeah,
go ahead. No,
and to your point, I think what stood out about what you were saying there is, our as much as we have these fight, flight, freeze, and fawn kind of experiences that our brains are built to engage in, we're not necessarily living in a world where those are at the forefront. So, even, and I think of anxiety very often when clients, and I try and interject and interrupt that thought process immediately. Just coining the phrase or, asking the question that, tell me what is exactly happening to you right now. Right now, what is happening right now? And if you really get your brain to see the version of what that is nothing is happening to you right now. Your past isn't happening. Your mother-in-law is not happening. Work isn't happening. Finance isn't happening. Right now, you're just sitting, in your chair, speaking to me, having this conversation. Nothing else is happening. Until you can really get your brain wrapped around understanding that a large part of these stresses, this anxiety, the fear that we have, is just a wonderful, beautiful way of your brain trying to organize information in a way that makes sense to the reality you're experiencing, but not necessarily the truthful fact of the reality you're experiencing, because nothing's actually happening to you. It's just the wonderful story that you've kept alive. And sadly, a large part of that is usually the narrative serves me and I get something from it. So I keep it alive for a reason, So It's really like getting people to really unpack that and going, like, why are you keeping the anxiety? Why are you holding on to the anxiety? Like,
Yeah.
what is that feeding?
Yeah, no, I think that's so well noted. And part of it is whatever that story or narrative is, it may not be serving you. It served you at some point. That's why it came into existence.
Yeah.
But if you get trapped in that loop of here's my narrative, and then out of habit, you react and respond in those ways. And so, again, as you said, anxiety is a concern with the future. Um, and I'm not talking about like clinical depression, but more just in the moment, depressed about an episode or something. That's like reflecting on the past. And so when we're not talking about like actual chemical imbalances, but when we're talking about just sort of reactive states, those don't exist in this very moment because they're thinking about the future, they're thinking about the past. And so that's where different types of somatic practices can become so important, because it's just what's going on right here and now. And the mind likes to run away from us, as you just pointed out. And so if we can find little tricks, like, what is the texture of the surface of the table? And if I run my fingertips on it and like I pay real attention, my brain isn't in the future or the past, it's right here and now. If I am washing the dishes, rather than just sort of letting my brain spin, what's the temperature of the water and what's the texture of the suds versus the silverware versus the plate versus the glass? Again, anything that brings us into the here and now allows us to start to regulate the nervous system, and it like prevent it from getting that hijacked by the what ifs and the patterns that at some point may have been adaptive.
Yeah. And I love that. The somatic body experiences are a wonderful way of interrupting, any kind of emotional state. But, with that said, a wonderful anecdote that I was taught since I was, it's the one thing my brother and I share, and it's, and I suppose that we learned a strategy around this, but purely based on the fact that, I would complain about something, and then he'd say to me, "Why are you giving it so much meaning?" And immediately, like I'd stop and kind of go, "I'm not sure. I don't know. Like, why am I giving it so much meaning?" And so today, as an adult, I often stop myself in moments of emotional outburst or anxiety or fear or whatever the pressure is that I'm feeling, kind of going, well, why are you giving it so much meaning? And because that's the part of that, and using this somatic body experience really changes the narrative of how you could experience a stressful moment, right? But I mean, one of the other questions is, part of the AI conversation that we touched on earlier. You're from an emotional intelligent group coaching, positive psychology, clearing beliefs coaching, somatic coaching, all of the stuff that you're doing. I'm sure you come across a lot of symptomatic things happening in the world, and what are some of those impactful areas that you think that people should really start paying more attention to? Because just when we started our conversation, we spoke about the interruption that AI is having in the way that it has, and suddenly there's almost this illogical detachment about human intelligence that's sort of coming to the fore. But yet, strangely enough, you're starting to see that the more AI is rearing its head, the more people are realizing, oh wow, we need a very people usable kind of approach to how does the human kind of fit into that. So from your perspective, what are you noticing that is really coming out of this interruption of AI versus human intelligence?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think one of the places where this is really interesting and has shown up is basically AI coaching bots that some companies are providing and promoting.
Yeah.
And if it's a matter of just having like a reminder to check in on something or on a given topic that you've picked, like a little anecdote or prompt on a daily basis. Sure, it can do that, and fantastic. And if that's at a more, accessible, whether financially or time-wise way for someone, great tool. AI is a fantastic tool, but it's good about information processing. One of the things that a lot of the research, again, psychology as a field has existed far longer than coaching, that's been shown is it's not really any given approach that is the most predictive of success and outcome. It's really the ability to hold space. And if we think about whenever, I know in my own life, when I've been distressed about something, it's being able to feel witnessed, that someone has empathy, that someone who cares about me cares about my suffering. You're never going to get that from an artificial tool, from a program that's crunching, data and information. So it's not to discredit where it's useful, but I really think if we go back to sort of the value of authenticity and those ripples of impact of how people show up in the world, I find that the most powerful experience I can have is feeling truly witnessed by another human being. And I think the most powerful thing I can do for someone else is to truly witness them in their lives. And what more are we doing when we have like romantic partners and lifelong relationships than, bearing witness to each other? And a program is never going to be able to do that, at least not, in the foreseeable future. I don't want to discount all the sci-fi stuff, but that's certainly not what we have here and now. And so where I think the humanness really comes in is when another person can hold space for us in any way, shape, or form, when there's a level of empathy, when there's a level of understanding, when there's a level of, this is a shared experience and it's messy, because you don't get messy in the same way when it's a rote answer. It's like, well, here's the distillation of things. And think about emotions, right? We never have just one. And going back to the idea of like, yeah, the somatic practices are great. Your point about like, why are you giving it that much meaning? Really important. And I build another step on that, which is it's okay to acknowledge that maybe some part of you does find it meaningful, but that's not you as a person. That's not you in your entirety. So something in me finds this significant or is really upset by this or, is really disappointed, but it's part of you as a person. And I don't think the complexity and the nuance and the feedback that is happening on a continuous basis is really understood. And we don't feel understood by AI and the like. And so I don't think it supports us in actually moving forward when we're trying to have it be a substitute for that.
And with everything you've just said, I'm going to make a statement that I like put my neck out and say, the beautiful thing that I believe that AI is actually doing for us is teaching us to be more human, to be even more human, to have an even more human experience. Because there's, like you say, the nuances that humans offer humans, and holding that space and having the ability to just bear witness of another human at whatever capacity that is, right? I think that is so significant. And I think a lot of people are missing that boat. They and I think eventually they'll get onto it. And I think it's, because 10 years ago, soft skills was considered, that stuff, people need to do when you've got time for it. And today, leading speakers in the world speak of vulnerability and empathy as the importance of, what leaders in the world should be practicing more of, so it's really, really interesting. So I've added new segments to my podcast, and it's the three quick questions to sort of just throw at you, and hope it doesn't trick you up. But what's your purpose, Dr. Jonathan? If you told us what your purpose would be, what would it be?
Yeah, my purpose is to help and support people in living more deeply meaningful and fulfilling lives.
What is the biggest dream for what it is you want to achieve?
The biggest dream, to know that it's made a difference, to have real concrete proof and testimony that it's not just ideas in my head, but that it's actually made things better.
And working, in emotional intelligence, group coaching, positive psychology, somatic coaching, clearing beliefs, all of that, what should people know that they don't know?
We think and we hear shoulds. Things should be different. My boss should have recognized my work. My coworkers should have done, their share. My children should have listened to me. And should is fighting with what is. It didn't happen. And if instead we can reframe it as could, my boss could have listened to me. My coworker could have done their fair share. My kids could have listened to me. I could have gone to the gym. Okay, but did it happen or not? Now what do I want to do? And then I can actually influence how I show up in the world.
Yeah, I love it. That's such a profound insight. All right, so Dr. Jonathan, just ending off, if we could summarize today's conversation and what you want people to take away from today, what would that be?
Yeah, I would say, when you have the time and the space, think through that being strategy, figure out what's the life that's really in alignment for you, and then try and show up that way. Because if you show up in the way that's right for you, it gives other people permission to show up in the way that's right for them. And then we're not acting on roles and assumptions of what we should be like, what other people should be like. And when things are at their most overwhelming and you can't get in touch with that sort of bigger picture, and there's lots of great work on it, like Simon Sinek's work on, your why, Viktor Frankl stuff on logotherapy and meaning. Go back to that how piece. How do I want to show up in this very moment, in this interaction, in this relationship? And if you really focus on how you want to show up in each and every moment where it's stressful, you'll be very close to living a life that you'll be very happy with.
Fantastic. Such a really interesting conversation. And so I'm just going to just to remind everybody, Dr. Jonathan believes that when we live, connect, and communicate authentically, we send out ripples, and which makes the world a more caring and connected place, one ripple at a time. If we want to get hold of you, where do we go, and how do we do that?
Yeah, so my website is stepsalongtheway.global. Also welcome people to they can also try Steps to Chat to find my schedule and just hop on 30-minute what's your next step conversation. Absolutely complimentary, no hard sell, just trying to support people in living their best lives.
Fantastic. Such a pleasure having you on the show, and thank you for unpacking some more human conversation with me. Dr. Jonathan Marion, all the way from Bali, thanks for joining us, and hopefully we see you soon.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for having me, Kevin. Take care.
Just want to bye.